And we'll talk to Chris slightly about the story behind the story. And one of those stories, can I just say, those who've been to the Byline Festival, we had Carol at the festival, she came to New York with us and met up with all these amazing American activists, is that she really has had quite a lonely journey. It's, in a way, it's quite a good story that she's not here, because I can big her up. She's a rock star. Yeah. She wears a leather jacket like Nick Davis, and she's a bloody rock star. And the Observer's great, but there's hardly anybody there. You have two reporters or so. Hi, Tamsin.
Hi, Tamsin.
Hi, Tamsin.
This is my lawyer.
It's actually my lawyer too.
She's fucking amazing.
So, we'll get to that. Carol worked, and I've seen it over the year, derided by Aaron Banks, Andy Whitmore, threatening messages online, I'd say, you know, sort of had been beaten up. The Russian embassy took exception to her. So did one of Vaughan's previous incumbents here, Julian Assange, saying more about that, but also legal threats. So she has dealt, since one of the first articles she wrote last May, I think, with a legal threat from some law firm, Dodds, and somebody other. Anyway, they're Putin's law firms, they're also Cambridge Analytica. And so it's just amazing testimony how she's kept going through this. And a lot of male journalists, to be honest, dismissed her at first. The tech bros go, you don't know what you're talking about, data. And she was right, and she's a hero, and we will have her back at some point. And I think it's her character which brought Chris to the fore, would you say?
Absolutely.
Tell us about how you met her.
She found me on the recesses of the internet. The first time I talked to her, it was the first time I actually talked to a journalist who was didn't pressure me at all, and you know, said, "Look, I'm just here to talk," and we chatted. She said, "Look, I'm not going to publish anything. I'm just here to chat." I think the first time I talked to her on the phone was like 4 hours. And I think that speaks a lot to Carol, that she can make somebody who she's never met before so comfortable that they're willing to chat for 4 hours about you know, a really complex story and about you know, a really intimidating company. And it was really through her understanding of the situation that I was in and her patience that made this story possible.
What situation were you in then? Can you just unpack that?
Well, I was moving back to the UK, and you know, so my entire life was up in the air. I had, you know, received all kinds of legal threats from Cambridge Analytica previously, and she not only was patient and sensitive to that, and understanding that, you know, this is a company backed by very powerful people, but she actually, you know, worked her ass off to you know, find me lawyers like Tamsin, you know, and a support network that actually made it possible for me to come forward, and also for a lot of other whistleblowers that you don't see, but there's a lot of people behind the story, and it's because of Carol's patience, but also perseverance in trying to help her sources that has made this story possible. I think in terms of journalism, it's a lesson that, you know, sometimes one of the things that I've found is, you know, you call it news, so it has to be new. Everything has to be right now, right now, right now. If I was dealing with someone, or if the other sources were dealing with someone who was that impatient, none of this would have come out. You know, I started talking to Carol in May of last year. So her investigation, her work, and her, you know, talking to, you know, not just me, there's, I think, 15 other people that she's spoken to, collecting documents and being really methodical and patient is why this story has been made possible. And I also have to really credit the Observer and the Guardian, but in particular the Observer team. You know, it's a very, very small team within the Guardian, but to their credit, that they were just as patient as Carol and just as supportive. And it really was that for lack of a better word, that nurturing environment that allowed everybody to disclose information for me to come forward. So I owe a debt of gratitude to Carol for being patient and being understanding.
And so Carol's background is a feature writer, a freelance feature writer. She's not fully employed, though has a contract. And you think, because she wasn't pumping and dumping, you've met other journalists since.
Absolutely.
And they're slightly more kind of, let's grab it and go. Do you find a difference in the way she approached it and what her aim was?
Yeah, she, the other thing, about Carol is that she's willing to share, which is something that I've noticed, not to slight up journalists, because obviously that's super important. So, like, please keep doing your job. But, one of the things that I've noticed is that the Carol and the Observer were willing to, work and collaborate with the New York Times, with Channel 4, and on this next story that is coming out, which I can't talk about yet, there's another media partner, and rather than seeing different newspapers or different news organizations as the competitor, actually understanding that if everybody works together, you can really raise the public's awareness about something that is important. And so, I think the lesson here is collaboration is a really powerful thing.
So when did you actually decide to speak? Was it at that 4-hour conversation with Carol, or after legal advice? What was the moment you thought, I can't hold this back any longer? Because we're 2 years after you left.
Yeah.
You read her article, I imagine, in the groundbreaking article last May, wasn't it?
I was the source for that.
Oh, you were the I didn't.
I was the source for that. Yeah.
Right, and so quite early on, you decided to come forward anonymously.
Originally, yeah, because I thought it was important. What she wanted to publish was important, the other thing that I've found is, when you go onto I've had a sort of a whirlwind lesson in Twitter now.
How many followers have you got?
Last time I checked, it was 60-something.
60 in 2 days.
Yeah. When you looked at some of the responses to Carol's reporting originally back in May, you had a lot of I call them the tech bros. I see that as somebody who's very technical myself, but nitpicking at, she didn't use this word or she didn't quite, phrase it in the right way. And rather than looking at the bigger picture of what was the article trying to communicate, and in addition, that it was one of the most read things on The Guardian because it was written in a very human manner, and that made it accessible. Storytelling is a really powerful tool. Storytelling is one of the only cross-cultural rituals that people have because it's such a powerful tool for remembering and understanding something. And so I think one of the other things that I've noticed is that in terms of talking about the discussion about the role of technology in politics and in society should not just be the exclusive domain of technical people, and that actually non-technical people, because everybody is now on social media, because everybody uses a computer. I mean, who doesn't use a computer now? Who doesn't use a phone now? Who isn't on Facebook aside from me? So this discussion needs to expand, and just because you aren't technical, Carol is not technical. I've had to sit down and talk to her over and over and over again about, like, what is a relational database? What is SQL? What is an algorithm, right? What is machine learning? What is a neural network? But she is the kind of reporter, and more broadly, the kinds of reporters at the Observer who have backgrounds in, talking about culture, or talking about the arts, or what have you, that are willing to tackle a really complicated subject and humanize it. And we need more voices like that, because right now the conversation is being dominated by technical people, because I think people are intimidated by technology because they don't know, the ins and outs of things. But I think the lesson also from Carol's reporting is dive in and try it out. Because everyone really needs to communicate their voice and their perspective on something that is becoming a really fundamental part of our society.
So before we go back, how you got into Cambridge Analytica and your campaign, just something I've noticed, because I've known you about 4 months now, something like that, and obviously Carol a bit longer. You didn't imagine the Facebook thing would be this big, did you?
Well, the thing that really, I'm actually really confused by Facebook. I don't understand what their play is right now, because like they make me out to be this suspect, or some kind of nefarious person. But like what they're not saying is, like, I'm the one that was proactively working with the Information Commissioner's office. I was the one who brought this to the British authorities. I am the person who has been proactively and openly and transparently working with the British authorities, and that's why the ICO could get a warrant so that they can go and search Cambridge Analytica tomorrow. It wasn't Facebook, it was me. So this idea that I'm somehow suspect is really frustrating, because I've been working hand in hand with the Information Commissioner for months now.
You're not just a suspect, you're a non-person now. You've been banned.
I mean, delete it. I was talking to my parents today, looking at the messages that I was sending to my dad, and it just says, this person is abusive and spamming, and it has like completely eliminated my entire record and being on Facebook. And this is the power that Facebook has. They can delete you off of the internet. I'm not being flippant. It's actually true. They have the. I can't use. There's so many apps now. I mean, I know this sounds ridiculous. I can't use Tinder now, for example, because you have to validate yourself with fucking Facebook, right? So So the thing that I've really come to really understand very personally is the very intimate and personal power that Facebook has in your life. I don't think I never even as somebody who's works, admittedly with a lot of Facebook data. I never quite fully appreciated until I got removed from all of the sort of Facebook associated platforms or things that use Facebook. How much you actually use Facebook day to day.
And how much have you knocked off the share price? It's about 15 billion now.
9 billion.
59 billion.
The thing. That was not my intention, and
the way they behave since.
I'll put it this way. I think that it is Facebook's behavior that has caused that knock in share price. I don't think it's me.
No.
I think it's the reaction.
Alex, absolutely.
They Tamsin is here. She can say that last week we were talking with Facebook's counsel, and they agreed that they wanted to talk to me in an open and collaborative manner, and they sent her an email. It's in writing. They turn around on Friday, just out of the blue, and drop this press release that says that I'm a suspect, after we agreed, that we were going to work together to improve this platform. And now they turned and they tried to turn the story against me, because I think they didn't realize how big and the reaction would be, but I think they've made it a lot worse for themselves.
So it reminds me a bit, and Tamsin will know this too, she's involved, there's the phone hacking scandal. It rumbled on for years until we got the Millie Dowler moment. And that's because a girl's, a murder victim's phone had been hacked. But with this one, we're all on Facebook. We all feel hacked a little bit. I mean, your experience of them banning you, and it's something most people on, I suppose some people are coming off now, that imagine that level of surveillance. You think that's it, because it actually comes home to your, to your iPad or your iPhone, that we're all part of this.
Yeah, and it's been, the other frustrating thing is that I feel like, in a way, it's partly been a distraction, because I came forward, to talk about what Cambridge Analytica does and my experience, and also to take my share of responsibility and my share of blame for being the research director when Cambridge Analytica was being set up. And I feel like, after we reached out to Facebook, and my thinking was, okay, we can work with Facebook. I can own up to this, and this company can face the scrutiny that it deserves, and people can be notified of what's happened. And the frustrating thing for me is that the story has really spiraled into Facebook's bizarre reaction to it, rather than what the original story was meant to be about. You know, and that's not necessarily an entirely bad thing. I think, you know, Facebook deserves a certain level of scrutiny, but you know, that wasn't what I set out to do. I'm not on a crusade against Facebook.
So, well then, let's move back to how. I don't mind if you. I hope you don't mind if I use the Sunday Mail's description of you. How did a Canadian gay vegan end up working for a military contractor in the UK?
Good question. Yeah.
Well, you worked on the Obama campaign. And by the way, it's private eye. I don't know if any private eyes here. There was a rather sort of dismissive, and I think rather sexist remark about Carole's work, said it was gushing. They also said you had nothing to do with the Obama campaign, you were a coffee boy. I remember this, the similar line said about Papadopoulos. I spoke to Ken Strasmer, who is somebody who started the micro-targeting for Obama. And
he was the national targeting director for the Obama campaign.
And that's
for Bernie's campaign.
And that's kind of you're only 18, that's your initiation into the dark world of micro-targeting.
Yeah. So, yeah, I haven't actually read much of the press. You guys probably know more about what's happening. I'm sort of being all over the place, so I don't even know who's saying what. I think one thing that I would say is I'm just a very curious person, and the thing that really was compelling when I joined SCL Group, this was before Cambridge Analytica, this was before Steve Bannon, this was before Facebook data, this was before everything. You know, the experience that I had before when I was working in the coalition was really frustrating.
For the Lib Dems, by the way, the coalition government.
Yeah, I'm not a Tory.
Yeah.
You know, if you are, that's fair. Not against Tories. You know, it was really frustrating working for a party where you kind of see lots of mistakes happening and you're trying to warn them and they don't really want to listen because it sounds too pessimistic, and you point to data and you go, look, you guys, the foundation of your party is collapsing, and that's just, you know, considered overly pessimistic or not being a team player or whatever. So, you know, because it was, you know, it was supposed to be the honeymoon period, so we were supposed to be all happy and nice, and I'm like everything's collapsing. Like, you know, shouldn't. It sort of felt like, you know, when you're on the Titanic and the guy who sees the iceberg and goes, hey, can you steer the ship somewhere? And they go, I don't know, you're just being pessimistic. Yeah, this ship has never sunk before.
So one of the things you told me about.
But just, sorry, to highlight just because, you know, people have asked me this. So when I first met Alexander Nix and SCL Group, the thing that they offered me was the freedom to sort of explore a lot of the research that I really wanted to be, you know, that I really wanted to do for a long time. Before I joined SCL, I sent a proposal to the University of Cambridge to look at, you know, whether I could, you know, model personality using micro-targeting approaches, and, you know, whether we could predict political behavior using psychometric data. And I showed Alexander Nix this paper, and he's like, "Oh, this is brilliant. Oh, we could totally use this." And so he's just like, "Yes, come, join, do your thing." You know, at the beginning, I had a lot of freedom, that's what was really appealing to me at the beginning. Is that so you know?
So should we just explain about psychometrics, because this relates to what you're saying about the Lib Dems. So Chris has a brilliant riff on this, and I think some people might know about Ocean, which is these 5 psychometrics. You can explain in a moment, but you did explain this brilliant thing, because you're obviously interested in it before you joined SCL. On the Ocean score, it's openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And Chris explained they're not like Myers-Briggs. These are verified through billions of points of data. They're not covariables, they're discrete things which can vary in themselves. I'm being non-technical here. And
you should dive. This is exactly what I'm saying.
But you said Liberal Democrats scored high on openness and low on agreeableness. They're basically open, disagreeable people. The worst people to have in a coalition. They hated that sort of, let's get on with the Tories. Is that right? And so this is the underlying stuff.
The reason why I got interested in in psychometrics in relation to politics was because one of the roles that I had when I was at the Lib Dems was research and data and technology and all that, and we kind of both plump it together. Even though they are different things, but anyway. Yeah, so I was trying to sort of look for relationships between demographic variables, so things like income or gender or socioeconomic status or ethnicity, all those kinds of things. The things that you can kind of see on a person, right? When you're walking down the street, those are sort of demographic variables. And for Labour and Tories, there are demographic features that do distinctly relate to much more to Tories and much more to Labour. But one of the things that I found was that there were people who demographically looked like a Tory and demographically looked like a Labour voter, and they were all supporting in some way the Liberal Democrats. And so when you're modeling that, you go, okay, so I can't use these variables. There must be some kind of what you call a latent construct, some other hidden thing that you're not seeing, because they all have the same behavior, but what you're measuring isn't the thing that's explaining that behavior. And so I came across a bunch of papers on personality and political orientation, and one really stuck with me, which is the Mondak paper, which it had this brilliant model, which was just sort of like a diagram of like disposition moderated by the environment, and then you have political behavior with some like other sort of moderating features, and that made so much sense to me. And so I looked at personality traits, and I realized that although there weren't that distinct, although Liberal Democrats weren't super distinct demographically, psychographically they were. So they were much higher on openness than the typical supporter of other parties, but also lower in agreeableness. And the problem with some of the names of the traits is that it's socially desirable to call yourself agreeable, but I'm, for example, not a very agreeable person. I'm quite stubborn, and so that would be a positive way of spinning low agreeableness. And then I started to think, right, this makes sense, because one of the things that we found in focus groups was that people would say, I'm Tory, I'm Labour, but when you had Lib Dems, they'd say, I vote Lib Dem. And it's because the Lib Dems are new as a modern party, so not many people have grown up Labour or grown up Tory, and so they have to decide to become a Lib Dem. Almost every single Lib Dem has to decide to become a Lib Dem. And that personality profile being really open, but not that, but slightly disagreeable or stubborn, makes sense, because you want to adopt ideas, and you're open to really new ideas, but you're also really bloody stubborn, and you're willing to remove yourself from a big party and go into the little party just so you can say, like, I'm right and you're wrong, and I know I'm right, and you're going to realize that you're wrong in 20 years, and I'm going to say I told you so. The classic example would be like a Richard Dawkins kind of character, somebody who likes to explore ideas but also is really stubborn.
So that drew you, all that research. At the time, Ocean, you said there was a research project that they were hoping, because of the data coming from social media, particularly as we know from Facebook and Cogan's work, people have been following that, that's a bit of a rabbit hole, that they could actually, this was a social science that could be tested. Like, there was a whole belief in the academia, various universities going, if we can amalgamate all this data from social media, we can actually predict people's behaviors like a science. Is that right? That's what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, when I joined SCL, and they sort of gave me this freedom to explore some of my ideas, in part because the firm, like traditional information operations, which is sort of what the firm does. It's, at the time when I joined, 80% of its clientele were military. That is usually done in places historically where you don't have a well-developed communications infrastructure, so the techniques were pretty old school. And when you look at trends in a lot of developing countries like Africa, for example, you have places that are leapfrogging in a generation of technologies. They're going from very little broadcast media to mobile internet in sort of one giant leap. And so that meant that there was there's sort of an explosion of data happening all around the world, even in places that are developing economies. And that creates an opportunity if you're a contractor, whether it's for the military or for various political activities in developing places, to sort of modernize and update your IO techniques.
IO
information operations.
And you just explained briefly about this fifth battle space, so people understand.
Oh yeah, yeah.
This came from a military background and not a civilian background.
Yeah, so information operations. So in military doctrine, you've got something called the 5-dimensional battle space. So you've got land, sea, air, space, like Star Wars space, and then information. So information is often called the fifth plane of your battle space. And so information operations is usually sort of divided into psychological operations and then like cyber operations.
And social.
Oh yeah, and civic, what the military calls like civic affairs, which is sort of like funding think tanks and stuff to produce policies or whatever. I don't really know. And so the idea of this fifth dimensional battle space is that if you can gain informational dominance against the belligerent, against your opponent, you can change their perception of this battle space, of this information battle space, or indeed of the physical plane of your battle space, and then exploit weaknesses or vulnerabilities from mistakes that you're sort of catalyzing. Because one of the things that people often ask, I've noticed, is sort of, well, what's the difference between information operations or IO and just marketing? Isn't this just good marketing? And if you think, when does a general use a marketing or branding approach to convince the opponent on the other side of the battlefield to do something? Right? You can't. It's like, imagine you're a general, right? Like, let's say I'm America and you guys are ISIS, or vice versa. And I can't create a tourism campaign for this hill that I want you to go on, sponsored by the American government, right? It's like that's just not credible. So I have to make my opponent think that there's something there that they need to go and do. Whether it's like we have a bunch of inflatable tanks, right? And surveillance planes see that and then they go and try to attack and there's nothing there and you flank them, right? Or if you know that the general that you're fighting, often phones up people in their hometown for advice. You need to proliferate that hometown's newspapers with information that is false, right? It's about changing the perception of your target so that they start to make mistakes, and you can then exploit that. And the idea of digitizing, but that is really resource intensive, right? That's like, we've got a general and we're trying to change, they're a key decision maker, so we're going to try to change their decision making. But the advantage of sort of the digital space is that I can take all of this information and learn as much about you as 10, 20 years ago studying this general, because you put all your information in one place, and then also because so much of your communications channels and your information channels are all online, you can then exploit that, and so you can create a programmatic approach to do the same kind of thing that 20, 30, 40 years ago you'd focus on this general. You can do it for the entire nation.
So this is an important moment to stop and consider that people are saying that what Cambridge Analytica did, and Robert Peston quoted that great data guru, Richard Littlejohn, saying, yeah, but what Cambridge Analytica did was just like what Obama did. You're saying it's not like traditional campaign. It's directing them to fake, not campaigns or ads, to fake realities. They're creating, and you think Cambridge SCL did this and Cambridge Analytica did that. It wasn't saying follow this campaign. It was saying this is your new reality.
Yeah, you know, when I was there, one of the sort of bread and butter things of the company is, and it promoted this in, you know, its pitch decks and its brochures and all kinds of things, is rumor campaigns. Rumor campaigns and you know, undermining people's confidence in civic institutions so that they, you know, don't trust the results, or starting, you know, rumors about an opponent, or as Alexander Nix said in The Undercover, you know, getting in prostitutes and creating compromise with that. You know, it's about changing people's perception of what's actually happening, and you know, we call it fake news. It's just a new name for it. You know, it used to be called like a rumor campaign or disinformation, and the reality is that, you know, everyone in the West is shocked by this, but really this is just blowback, because like our governments do this all the time in Africa, our governments do this all the time in South America, our governments do this all the time in Asia. You know, we do this to other people, but you know, it's called fake news because it's happening to us, but really it's disinformation. You know, fundamentally.
He also said in the Undercover film, I hope you've all seen it, that I think we dip deeper in the well of fear. And I noticed Carol pointed out last night that Coogan's, this is the guy who was doing the search project on Ocean, which a lot of data came from and ended up.
Yeah.
Is he Dr. Spectre anymore? Is that, yeah, no.
I don't know, he changed his name to Dr. Spectre, and then now he's Kogan. I don't know.
But he's looking at the Dark Triad.
Yeah, Dark Triad.
Dark Triad. Do you look at Dark Triads? Was that one?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So the Dark Triad. So like in the 5-factor model of personality, you know, these are 5 traits that. So when you think about what is personality, in psychology they call it the human universal, because these are the core constellation of attributes that exist cross-culturally. Everybody in the world has a personality. So it doesn't matter if you're born in China or you're born in Texas, like you have a personality. That might be culturally moderated. Your behavior might be socially scripted because you've grown up in a particular way and follow a certain social code. But these 5 traits exist cross-culturally, cross-linguistically, and you know, the difference between the 5-factor model and something like Myers-Briggs is that the research that has validated it came bottom up. It wasn't some guy going, "This is my version of personality, and that's what it is," and you know, then let's sell it like Myers-Briggs. You know, it was based on sort of this bottom-up research.
And the Dark Triad is a kind of a bad combination of those 5 traits.
The Dark Triad is sort of these like other 3. So that's Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and narcissism.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, and so you've got in the population a normal distribution for each of these 5 traits. You don't have a normal distribution for these 3 other traits, which is sort of why they're like this like other thing. But you have enough people with them that it's argued that they're considered personality traits. They're just sort of like this sort of other set of personality traits that a smaller group of people have.
And so let's get to Bannon and Mercer. So you worked for SCL like 4 or 5 months or whatever before the pitch came. There's one story about how it came about, but you asked to meet this guy called Steve, and there's a very funny story, I think, I don't know if you heard it, why it's called Cambridge Analytica, apart from the fact that Alexander Nix didn't get into Cambridge. By the way, it's just been suspended from, so we should be slightly respectful, Cambridge Analytica. But why is it called Cambridge Analytica? And there's an information operation behind this, isn't there?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's funny that you say that Alexander Nix, he went to Eton, but he didn't get into Cambridge, and that sort of speaks a lot to his inner demons.
His dark triad.
Anyway, so, yeah, so I got introduced to Steve. Alexander introduced me to Steve because he had been talking back and forth during my first couple of months. Alexander was talking to Steve Bannon This is like, remember, this is like before Steve Bannon was Steve Bannon. Right? This is like some guy with like a blog that was for angry white dudes. Right? Like, you know, I mean, that's what Breitbart is. Like, I got introduced to Steve, and part of the reason was because Alexander's sort of typical razzle-dazzle wasn't really that convincing to Steve. Like, you have to remember, when you're dealing with a lot of clients from sort of the post-colonial era in the Commonwealth, you can kind of sell this sort of posh English, Etonian, old sort of colonial, there's sort of a weird power dynamic that you get. And so he would often sort of play that up with a lot of African clients or Caribbean clients. But it didn't work with Steve, sort of went over his head. And Steve would be coming, and he'd be more interested in going and talking to like student groups at Cambridge, right? And I think that speaks a lot to who Steve is, that he would come over here, and one of the main things he wanted to do is go to Cambridge and speak to student societies, and rather than have dinner with Alexander Nix. And so he introduced me to Steve, and we talked a lot
about fashion.
Yeah, because one of the things. So I was also started. I haven't finished. Probably never will have time to finish a PhD in trend forecasting in fashion, because for me, politics and fashion are like the same thing, because they're all about identity and your role in society, and trends in fashion are an interesting proxy for culture. So Steve and I were talking about what is culture, and how do you change culture. I said that, if you want to change culture, you first have to understand this construct that is culture. You can't change something if it's just a sort of amorphous blob that, it's there, but you can't really define it. So I said, define it, quantify it, because if you can quantify it, then you can measure it, and you can actually start to create a roadmap of how to change it, if that's what your objective is. And so I said that, if you think about the adjectives that we use to describe personality traits, loud or quiet or neurotic or whatever, and then you also think about some of the words that we use to describe culture, they're often the same. So if you think about like the stereotype of an Italian being more extroverted or maybe slightly neurotic, or no offense to England, it's Italian, it's a great country. I shouldn't slag off cultures whilst I'm talking. If you think about, what is a British person, or what is a German person, or what is it, immediately the adjectives that you're thinking are the same adjectives that we use to describe people. And so I said that arguably the units of culture are people. And I know that kind of sounds like obvious, but if you can then measure or predict the sort of dispositional attributes, the constellation of attributes that make up a person, you can measure that person, and if you can measure that person, you can measure people. If you're measuring people, then you can extend that to measuring a culture, right? So, and one of the things that I said is, like, it sounds like what you want to do is start a trend, and so you need to find, if you think of the distribution of certain traits that make up people in your population that influence culture, right? What you're actually doing in terms of culture change is you're picking a particular trait and you're trying to move the distribution one way or the other, right? And if you can predict those attributes in people, then you can create literally a list of people who make up the bit of culture that you want to shift, if that makes sense.
You used a very brilliant example that one of the reasons Bannon, quite early on, you made clear that, I'm talking to you, that Cambridge Analytica was set for the presidential election, but that Steve liked British culture because it had a attributable value in America and was very influential.
Yeah. So I forgot to actually answer your previous question, so I'll answer it. So anyway, sorry, I kind of go on tangents. I've had a long day.
Great tangents.
But anyway, so the conversations that I had with Steve were interesting, and I think Alexander noticed that. that he liked sort of talking about ideas and theory and all of that, which I love to do. And so he decided that in order to impress Steve Bannon, we needed to set up a fake office in Cambridge because we needed to because the thing is that his Etonian razzle dazzle looked like welcome to our office in Mayfair, I want to Eton, and here's my posh business card, it's from the same printer as Prince Charles, isn't that amazing? And that didn't really work. So we needed to present ourselves as much more academic. Not to say that we weren't academic, but we needed to curate our presentation. And so we created this fake office in Cambridge and brought a bunch of people to set up this office beside the university to make it look like this is our Cambridge site, so Potemkin Cambridge office. And so later when the Mercers bought in and Steve and then they appointed Steve to set up the company, he decided that he should call it Cambridge Analytica to sort of as a tip of the hat to our deep links with the University of Cambridge. And so a false reality was infused into the name Cambridge Analytica. It's its soul.
And the Mercers, let's explain Robert Mercer. Many people know who Robert Mercer is, probably do by now. Robert started IBM, natural language processing, the same analytical, how to human behavior or human meaning, how to boil it down. And then Rentec, Renaissance Technologies, hyperfast trading, one of those successful funds. You met Bannon, you met Mercer. What was your impression? Was he like Steve Bannon or slightly different?
No, he's very different. I've worked on a lot of political projects, and usually not always, but usually the rich guy that's funding it is not always the smartest person in the room, and so you have to kind of go, thanks for your money, let me try to explain in human terms what we're actually doing with it. But the difference was that with Robert Mercer, he has a PhD in computational linguistics, so he's he gets it, right? He's smart, and so he's actually the smartest guy in the room, and he'll make you know that. So he'll ask those questions that you're I was really hoping you wouldn't have to ask that. But he's totally different. Whereas Steve is very sort of he's much more extroverted and much more brash, I think, and militant and aggressive in how he talks. Robert Mercer is just totally silent, he doesn't really talk much, and he'll sit and not really look at you and just not say anything for 20 minutes and then just have one cutting remark that slashes the entire thing of what you were saying because he finds out one weakness of but he was really smart, and it was sort of this perfect storm of the sort of militant vision of Steve Bannon and the fact that there was a billionaire who already knew what algorithms were, so you didn't have to explain machine learning to him because he became a billionaire because of machine learning, because of algorithms. And so you had a billionaire who just said, right, okay, what is your training set? What is what are your stats? What kind of methods are you using? And it was this perfect storm of having a really rich guy who's super smart and super technical, and a guy with a really militant vision of what he wanted to do, who was pushing this billionaire to put in lots of money. And then you had Alexander Nix, who is the razzle-dazzle Etonian who's there for the ride, going to the fancy dinners.
And they gave you, I've seen estimates vary from $15 to $20 million a pound. They gave you a lot of money to set up this thing.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of depends on how you count the money. The principal investment was $10 million at the beginning, but Mercer also, so the way the company was set up, because everyone finds it confusing as to what is Cambridge Analytica and what is its relationship with SCL? So let me explain it so people get it. So the Mercers were concerned about the idea of acquiring like a military contractor to work in American, a foreign military contractor to work in American politics, because the optics of that would probably be suboptimal. So they wanted to create like an American brand, you know, not just optically, but also like compliance with FEC regulations and like FARA and all of these things that that the United States has. So they set up Cambridge Analytica. And the way it worked is that SCL Elections, which is one of the companies in SCL Group, and the reason it was with SCL Elections is because Alexander had more shares in that, and he wanted to keep more of the control for himself, so he decided to use SCL Elections. And SCL Elections then assigned all of its intellectual property to Cambridge Analytica, and then Cambridge Analytica licensed back the intellectual property to SCL Elections, and then created an exclusive service provision contract between Cambridge Analytica and SCL Elections, so that all of the work that Cambridge Analytica would get would have to go to SCL Elections. So Cambridge Analytica is more of like a concept.
A fake office, a fake company.
Everything happens out of the London office of SCL. It's not actually technically Cambridge Analytica. Most of the staff there are paid by SCL. It's not Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica is there for compliance reasons and branding reasons, but behind the company is the same military contractor, SCL.
And so how much did they give you, do you think, in the end, with all these various contracts? It's more like 20 million, is it?
Yeah, yeah, because the other thing that Mercer wanted, which was quite smart, you have to remember also that like when you're a billionaire, you need to find like a challenge that is like worthy of your resources. So, you know, because it's quite boring to be a billionaire once you like can just buy everything, right? So a lot of these really rich guys want a challenge, and so like the nation becomes the challenge, right? And so he had all like, and the other thing about these like billionaires in the States, they all have these like little rivalries. So he really didn't like the Kochs because the Kochs were like too influential. So he wanted, and they would go around and like buy up these random companies that, you know, had like 5 people, but they were like an important political consultancy or something. And so you have these like massively rich people going and buying these tiny little like mom and pop shops just to like expand their network within like local Republican politics in Iowa. And so he came up with this idea, which actually was quite smart, where, you know, if you put in money into a political consultancy because you own it, it's not a donation, right? It's an investment. So you don't have to report that, right? And then you go and donate to a bunch of different candidates, and you earmark that funding to your firm, right? So you put in $1 million here, and that $1 million then has to go back to the company that you own. And you can take that money out, and then you can put it somewhere else, and you can recycle that money so that you gain the same kind of political capital, but you amplify the effect of every dollar that you're spending. And it, you know, in terms of the actual sort of cost of projects, it doesn't really matter because you can just put in as much money as you want into the company because you're the owner, you're the investor. It's not a political donation. So you can report these smaller donations, but really you can fund as much as you want in the actual service provision without necessarily having to report it.
So this is important because, I mean, from what was reported yesterday, and I think you told me before, it's quite clear that though Donald Trump wasn't known to you as the candidate, I'll talk about the US water, the research you did during the swamp, or others did during the swamp, you'll have to talk about Mauer im Kopf, if I've got that right.
That's German.
The war in the head, we'll get to that. And also deep state, and also the vote is rigged. You talked about that being a classic SCL operation. Trump pulled that out. You didn't know that you knew this was a presidential election from the get-go, from 2013. You didn't know it was Trump.
No. And I don't think necessarily anybody at the company per se, I can't really speak for Bannon, but most people wouldn't you know, remember like when Trump was funny, right? Like when he was like apprentice Trump, like you're fired, right? Like, you know, this is before, you have to remember like the world was different back then. But yeah, so like we went out and explored the population we tried to be as neutral as possible. So one of the advantages of having non-Americans run research about Americans is that we would look at the United States in the same way that we would look at research in an African country. So one of the things that people kind of forget is like, we will use words to describe other cultures, like that's a ritual, right? But here it's a tradition, right? And that sort of bias can sometimes cloud, or cloud what you see or what you're actually observing, and you start to discount things that actually might be important. And so we went around and with a how should I put it, with a radically open mind to the population, we went and explored all kinds of constructs and ideas, and one of the things that we found was that there were like all kinds of bizarre things that were happening in pockets of America that no one was really talking about, but we were observing because we would bother to ask the question. One of the advantages, one of the things that we did that compared to like traditional targeting or traditional political research is we would just go and ask people what we should be asking. I think that was one of the big problems, for example, with the Hillary campaign, is it's like, if you can have an amazing data science team, you can have amazing models, but if you haven't asked the right question, you're modeling the wrong thing. And so the insight that you get is systematically biased from the starting bias that you have. So we would go and sort of have this like really open mind to things, and we would listen to what sounded like crazy people talk. But if you start hearing that more and more, and you kind of go, okay, maybe there's something to that. And after listening, just in a totally unstructured way, like we would just go and like chat with people. We would go sit in their living rooms. We'd look at like how they lived, like what was their life like, and then we would start to develop, a hypothesis, here and a hypothesis there, and that's when we would then go and test it in a quantitative fashion.
Just unpack that a bit again. You test that like online with like hundreds or thousands of people. A phrase like "drain the swamp" or something like that.
Yeah. So I'm just getting to that. So one of the things that started to emerge was that we literally heard these sort of narratives about Washington as something that was like gross and disgusting, that was dirty, right? And we literally tested this phrase because it kept coming up. There's literally like the words of people that were saying it's like we should drain that swamp. Like it wasn't creative genius in the sense that we just listened to people.
And then you tested it. Did it resonate? It wasn't just random. I like that phrase. You go back and test that.
Yeah, we tested it. But some of the other things that we were testing, we weren't just testing like words or sort of verbal narratives. We were also testing visuals, and so we tested a lot of images of walls, for example.
Well, explain about
scaling a wall.
Explain about Maurer and Kopf and that German research, because it's amazing bit of research. Was this from you, by the way? Are you to blame for this? Maurer and Kopf.
Well, I'm not to blame for German perceptions and
Did you introduce this research?
Yeah, right. So, okay, so Maurer and Kopf is this effect in post-reunification Germany where people will overestimate the distance east to west compared to north to south. And this idea of having a wall in the head is that, the wall sort of physically embodied the separation, the cultural separation and the ideological separation. And it not only like physically separated people, but it psychologically distanced and made, East Germans the other for West Germans, and West Germans the other for East Germans. And so even when the wall came down, that psychological distance still remains.